the pleasure of introducing David. And I don't know if David's on right now. Let's see if David can come on. Thanks, folks. Oh, there's David. Cool. And he's got his super cool, yes, his TC 2020 ish t-shirt on. I love it. I love it too. So David is he's coming to us from a field that I know very well, is project management. Something that I think a lot of us can bring in, and really in our field, if you haven't done any real work in project management, um, it will really help you out on a day-to-day basis of trying to figure out just kind of how to go through and deliver things on time and make sure your clients are happy. So David, I also seen that you've been working on your data scientist badge.
Yeah,
And
that's
training.
been it's been a heck of a travel. I started back in May. I just did visual analytics at the end of November, and the only thing I have left to get done is data prep, and then I get the nice shiny badge I can put on my profile.
Awesome, awesome. That's what I need to work on myself too. And you've got a Medium blog too.
Indeed, indeed. And I invite everyone to come through, take a look. It's where you'll notice that on my public page, I do a lot of the heavy data visualization work, and then I put the story and explanations in the Medium blog because I just feel it's a better format for telling the story. I'm a storyteller, so the blog space seems to be just a better location for all of my ramblings.
Perfect, perfect. And I'll also be keeping an eye out for your cat. I hear your cat likes to make cameos.
I have one cat that refuses to be outside of every meeting. So like the entire construction industry in the city of New York knows this animal. She's been called the supervisor more times than I can count. So you'll see her. She's moving around on the chair behind me. And otherwise, she like claws at the door, or claws at the bed, it's just like, all right, the cat is going to be in the picture, and it's a major violation, but I can't get around it.
So, ladies and gentlemen of the TFF family, I want to introduce David Brezler. David, please take it away.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Caesar. And I didn't realize that we shared a project management common background. So you and I will have to chat offline because I loved your explanation of how to build guitar pedals from TC20. And I feel like that's a whole project on itself.
Oh yeah.
So let me share my screen because I've got the let's see, presentation up and running, and we'll see if we can get this to work. So you guys can see that. Let's see. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put this on presentation. All right, fantastic. So that's where we are in life. You've started data presentation adventure. You're going forward. You've got some great insights. You put all those tips that you just heard in the last hour into your latest visualization, and you're standing in front of your CEO, and she's like, "Hey, great chart. How do we make that happen?" And you happen to have a few ideas because you're the one that did the analysis, and you said, if we did this, it would cause that. If we did these things, we would have that effect. And at the end of your explanation, the boss is like, "Well, you seem to know all the ways that this is supposed to work, so go ahead and get it done." So let's say you have some data. This is, if you've been through desktop level 3 training, you've seen the hex bin chart. And you can take a look at, this particular area over where the red dots are heavy spots, obviously, and those would be bottlenecks. And we got to figure out how to get more cabs to those locations because you've got people standing, waiting to get to work, and then they're calling the dispatch office and they're angry and they want more cabs. So you've got to come up with a plan of how to fix the bottleneck. But you've never managed the project before. So what does that mean? Or at least you thought you never managed the project before, because as I'm going to try to illustrate through the length of this presentation, there's a bunch of crossovers from putting together your favorite chart, dashboard, data story that all match up with concepts that are in the project management field. and you can get training to fill in the gaps where you need some extra help. So let's go forward. And you guys keep me on time because I have a really bad habit of just getting into the story and then getting lost. So you got a great visualization. That's great. Go get it done. And your initial reaction is, zoinks, I'm not sure how that's supposed to happen. Well, I'm going to make sure that you have at least the processes that you need. And you can go and do a bunch of research afterwards. You can take a look at the certification that I have, which is Project Management Professional. There are a few variations of project management certification. There's the PMP, there's the Prince 2, there are certifications that are specific to the construction field. There are certifications like Scrum and Agile, and I'm going to talk about that later also. That seems to, Scrum and Agile seem to touch off a lot of arguments on the internet, and of course the way to happiness is not to get into arguments on the internet. So I'm going to give you a real 10,000 foot view of what that means, but that's at the end of the presentation. So before we get deeper into it, a few definitions. Project. What does project mean? Who needs it? Why is it important? The project is something that's temporary. It's something that has an end, and it's something that has a defined budget, schedule, and resources attached to it. Now, you'll notice that people get put onto things that are called projects that don't seem to have an end. That is not a project. That's called an organizational program. And organizational programs, you'll understand, organizations are not just governments or local, municipal, state, federal level departments. Sometimes those are private companies. Sometimes they're nonprofits. Sometimes you have things get called a project, right? That in point of fact are continuing programs. So know which one you're getting involved in, right? Because programs seem to have reporting endpoints, but they're not an actual project, even though they have that title. So project, the definition is it has an endpoint, it's got a defined budget, it's got a defined scope, and it has a defined schedule. If it doesn't have those things, it's not a project according to the orthodox definition. You know, that's one interpretation. There's another interpretation, and then this other guy has a different interpretation. But the orthodox definition of project is those things. Sponsor is always the person who's paying for it. Now, that's somebody you want to have a good relationship with, because you know the person that's holding the purse strings is sort of important to making sure that the project gets funded, gets paid for on time. The people that are working on the project have the funds so that they can get paid on time, and so on down the line. Stakeholder. Now, stakeholder, and this is where the relationships start, because when you're working on a Tableau project, there are always stakeholders. You've got somebody who constantly is going to be coming to you and saying, you know, that section of it looks like something that I want in my final version, or that is not something that is an insight that I want in my final version, even though it may be true. And those are also things that happen on projects. You know, you've got stakeholders that are internal to the project team. You have stakeholders that are external to the project team. And then you have stakeholders that may just be in a different section of the organization that you're working for and for whom you're running the project. Team members are people to the left and right of you. They may be slightly above you. They may be not at your level, but they are on your team, and realize the value and the contribution of who is on your team. Benefits realization, a really interesting story. I was on my current project. I'm currently working on a program in a program management office that's rebuilding all of the public housing that got destroyed by Hurricane Sandy in New York. And that's some time, some money. But I was talking with another colleague at a certain point, and I said, you know, I really want to work on benefits realization. And this was someone else from the project field. He said, what does benefits realization mean? Benefits realization, and the reason I'm telling you that story is because not everybody that's in your field knows all of the definitions that you're going to be talking about after you get your PMP certification. I really try to represent that as a standard, but the point is, not everybody necessarily has the same definitions, and sometimes you need to bring those definitions with you. But benefits realization is, how do we make sure that the project has the greatest amount of benefits for all of the stakeholders, right? So back up a couple of definitions. Stakeholders are going to be anybody that has, will, or is currently touching the project in any way, shape, or form. So if you produce a dashboard, for example, in New York State right now, we have a very heavy utilization of the Johns Hopkins data from, or the COVID data from Johns Hopkins. I said that backwards. And it's producing daily charts and dashboards on the New York State Department of Health website. So every single resident in the state of New York is a stakeholder of that particular item, that particular product, right? So the benefits to every single resident in the state of New York are vast, and being able to deploy an active live spreadsheet and chart in that way has a large amount of benefits to the entire state. But that's just a key example from our current situation, and how you can apply that to project management. The business case. Now, I want to spend some specific time talking about the business case. The business case is the entire reason you're doing this project. So if we roll back to the example of the bottlenecks with the taxi pickups, there are bottlenecks. Bottlenecks are bad, right? People get frustrated, it costs money, you don't have people getting to work on time, there's a lot of problems. Business case is the main focus according to the PMP philosophy that you are doing any project that you're doing. So that is your guiding stars. Like, what is the reason, what's the thing that this is going to cause in terms of profit, execution, process, facility, benefits realization? That's your business case. And that should be on all of the documents that you have. This is the reason we are doing XYZ in this project. So moving on. This interesting document on the right is called a project charter. Now, I don't have a link, a dedicated PMI, for example, link. PMI is the organization that offers the exam for the PMP. This one I got at the link that's underneath the graphic. There are about 18 bazillion examples across the internet of how to design and present a project charter, because everyone thinks that they can design a better one. However, this is the basics of it. You know, what is the difference between what's on the right and what's on the left is a critical one. Statement of work is just a list of what you think you're going to do during this project. A charter, the difference in what's in the charter is that all of those things authorize the project manager to do the project. And the reason I'm telling you, get this document, please, is because the project charter authorizes the project manager to spend money and to leverage resources. So that's a hard document that you can point back to, that anytime you go to a different section of the department, agency, organization, whatever, and they say to you, why are you spending money? What are you using this person for? How come you're taking up so much time and space? You can point back to this charter and say, I have authorization from the executive sponsor that says I'm allowed to do this. So that eliminates a huge number of fights, because once you can point back to a solid document that says I'm authorized, end of story, right? I'm going to recommend that you do not start your project unless and until you have one of these. It doesn't necessarily have to say project charter on it. It doesn't have to be in this format. It doesn't have to necessarily have exactly the same things, but you need something that you can point back to and say, I'm authorized. And you've heard about baseline schedules, budgets, and estimates. So I'm going to deal with that in the next slide. However, baseline means this is what we know is to be the truth in terms of how much we're spending, how much time it's going to take, and how many people we're going to use, and what the final product is going to be right now. And this is what everybody's agreed upon right now until it changes, and it's going to change. But that's the basics of your baselines. And now, in terms of estimates, there are several different types. You want to estimate both, or excuse me, not both, there's more than two. You want to estimate the budget, the time scale, and the scope. And those can come in a few different flavors. You can say, I'm going to use an analogous estimate. Analogous estimate means that you're going to look at another project that was of similar scope and budget and say, it took this long, it cost this a similar amount of money, and it should be this number of people. And that's going to be what we estimate right now until we do a little bit more planning is going to be the estimate. Now, that's one version. And as we said before, in a different item, that's one interpretation. There's another interpretation. So you can have an order of magnitude estimate, which means that you are 25% below the actual number and 75% above, but that creates a range. And you can say, well, I know that it's about this much, but we're going to do more planning and we're going to figure out what it actually is. So, but we know for a fact that it's got to be in this range. And then you can have a bunch of different estimates, but I'm going to allow you guys to go and do that research on project management outside of this presentation, because I don't want to belabor the point and then I run out of time. After you initiate the project, you've got the project charter in hand, or at least some method of authorization. Then you actually have to plan the project. Because once the organization says, all right, go do it, here's your authorization, then you got to come up with a solid plan, right? Once the boss says to you, go fix the bottlenecks, and you say, okay, we think that it's going to be this much time, this much money, this is the scope, then you actually have to create the plan to make that happen. So when you've got a, let me back up 1 second, because I just realized I forgot to tell you one critical thing. On the charter should have the project manager's name, the sponsor's name, and the top level team. And that top level team is going to decide who's on the next level down team, which is the slide we're on right now. So after you get to this stage, you're going to create a planning team, because the top level team is just, those are the people that came up with the idea and figured out how to put what's on the charter. The planning team is actually going to figure out, well, in order to create this bottleneck, we can do one of two things. Or excuse me, in order to resolve this bottleneck, we can do one of two things. We can have flying taxis, or we can widen the street in front of the 59th Street Bridge. Neither one of those things is very likely right now. So now we have to come up with a third option, right? But you need to have people on your team that are going to help you plan how you're going to affect that project. Could we come up with more efficiencies by having traffic police at that specific spot at those times? Could we limit the number of taxis that are going through and force people to double up in cabs? Or is there an alternate plan? We're not sure right now, but we're going to figure it out. Scope is all of the details. Scope is, do we need to, if we need to widen the road, what does widening the road look like? Who are the people that are going to widen the road? What is the size of the firm that needs to do the work to widen the road? That scope item feeds into the work breakdown structure, and the work breakdown structure is going to let you know what each person is on the project is supposed to do while they're at work. Schedule is something you're also going to build out while you're on the planning phase. You're going to say, okay, now that we've actually gotten authorization to do this, now that we've started to plan, we're going to figure out how long it's actually going to take, because we estimated it was supposed to be around this much, but now that the boss said, okay, go, here's your authorization, now we have to figure out if we were correct in our original estimate, or if we have to come up with a completely different number. Quality, the definition of quality is how well does the final product match the original requirements that you were given, right? So the requirements are going to feed into the scope, because it's required that we reduce the traffic, but it's also required that we expand the road. So what are the requirements? How does that feed into the scope? And how does that feed into the work breakdown structure? And then at the end of the project, how are we going to measure quality? How are we going to measure quality along the way of the project? So you've got a couple of things that project managers use along the way. One of them is called total quality management. If you're measuring quality metrics along the way, normally the thought is that at the end of the project, there will be a high rating of quality. Total quality management is a real interesting chapter in the project management book of knowledge, but we're not in a spot where I can spend 45 extra minutes on it. Communications plan is quite literally one of the more critical things that you can have go right on your project. Make sure that you know who's supposed to call who for what. Who gets a phone call, who gets an email, who gets a personal visit. There's a whole thing in project management called a RACI chart. It's a definition of who's responsible for something, who's accountable for something, who gets a communication, and who just gets informed by the monthly newsletter or some other ancillary method. But that RACI chart is your entire communications plan, and it has a very, very deep impact on how well your project runs. So that I want to draw a parallel to that and a lot of the other things that I just talked about and your last data visualization, right? As you're working on your specific chart or dashboard for your business, you're constantly in conversation with both the stakeholder and your boss, and possibly some team members that might be building features for you that you can then add in. That communications pathway and those different little, whether this person gets an email, whether you have a text message, whether you're on Slack with them, whether you use Jira, all of those different things, that's a communications plan. And you can think about it in terms of that whole neural network type of layout, where you've got nodes and lines and different things and who's attached to who and the layers of communication. But have that communications plan mapped out. Things can collapse really fast if you don't know who you're supposed to talk to when for what. And make sure quality is another critical item. Once you agree to what the scope is supposed to be, make sure that that's another thing that gets signed off on, because if you're working, suddenly they change the requirements on you, which of course never happens, right, Caesar? But you're working, and then suddenly the requirements change. Well, then the metrics for quality are not going to be the same. And the measurement of what your quality metrics are is going to look completely different. So make sure that not only you know what the requirements are and what quality is going to mean, but make sure that you get sign-offs, and then if there's a change, log the change and remap the quality metrics. I'm doing okay on time for right now. So execution phase. Now, this is where a lot of people are very, very good that are in the data fam. Execute, produce, right? That is what we do all day, every day. You want some stuff? I can give you some stuff in 10 minutes. Hang on. You want some stuff from me when I just got to the office? I haven't had second coffee yet. You got to wait until 10 o'clock. But some people have different, production styles and that kind of thing. But execution is, you've done the planning phase. You know what the scope, budget, schedule, all that is supposed to be. You know what your quality metrics are supposed to look like. You're producing the product. The teaming aspect is something that I have to really talk about for a few minutes. Project management is, aside from politics, one of the most people-intensive work environments you can imagine. It is all about the people. You walk into the office, a project is happening, you're having to interact with people. You walk in the middle of a project, you suddenly have to turn around and figure out who all the stakeholders are from top to bottom, where you fit in the communication layers, and who's working next to, above, below, and in front of you. Project management is one of the ultimate people businesses. Doesn't matter if it's digital, if it's construction, if it's regulatory, all of that. It's intensely people centric. So norming, storming, conforming, performing. You have heard this probably before in psychology, in your own work or something else, but every single team goes through that. I don't like this guy. I haven't had an agreement with that person. All of that happens, and especially if you have collaborative teams that come from different companies and they're all working on a joint venture. I have stories about stories. So the point that I'm getting at is you've got few phases that you're going to go through, and every project goes through that. When you put a team together and that team hasn't necessarily worked together before, there's a way to get through it. There's a way to make everybody comfortable, there's a way to make everyone feel valued, and you have to make that happen if you expect the project to be successful. Also in the execution phase, data production. Yes, this is our favorite section, right? Except for when we get to build the dashboards at the end. Data production on a project is critical. You have to measure whether or not the schedule is being adhered to, measure how much money is getting spent, measure whether or not whether people are billing the right amount of hours or the hours that they intended to bill. There's so much data that comes out of a project, and it all has to be logged very clearly so that you know after it gets produced how you can analyze it. So this is another connection point between Tableau and the project management field, right? Because one of the big things, and you hear people talk about this when they're discussing Tableau server all the time, is data architecture, right? Where does the data sit? How is it getting transferred? Who has access to what data? How do they have access? What permissions does this person have? What permissions does that person have? And that's a reality that creates utilization of the communications pathways, because people are constantly trying to figure out how they can get access to different pockets of data and how they can use that data effectively and what it is that they're working on. Inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs. I want to talk about that for a few seconds. Tableau in our world is everything. In a project world, it is a tool, right? It's something that we use, and there are techniques involved in using the tool. And once you produce the visualization, I mean, I did this personally on my current project. I produced a range of visualizations for leadership, and they were like, yeah, but we're used to looking at the numbers. And then I produced the picture for them to look at, and they said, that is not the way that we understood what that meant. So the power of data visualization is very, very strong, but inputs on a project are things that are materials that show up. They can be the computers that you use to create the thing. They can be data flows that could be just one input. Tools and techniques are going to change depending on which project that you're working on. What you expect as an output from that entire process chain is going to change depending on what project you're on. Know that they are not the same for every project. And there's a large amount of research to be done on what those specific things mean. But the critical point about the execution phase is this is where the work gets done. This is where you're producing the widgets, where you're creating the dashboards, where the software is getting created, where extra features are getting built. Now, monitoring control is where you have to deal with these guys. And on every project, you're going to have minions, right? There's a minion that is not going to cooperate. There's a minion that is just doing the bidding of some other minion. There's a minion, there's a lot of minions on projects. But monitoring control is essentially the work is getting done. These guys are showing up. Projects are getting built. Monitoring is how much can we put into the visualization chart, dashboard, whatever, that shows us where we are in terms of, at a glance, in terms of status. And how do we use the information that's in that chart to go back to the execution phase and tighten up what's happening, add another resource where another resource needs to be added, or if there's too many resources on something, can we move one of those resources over to a different task because that task needs to also get done. There's a few different ways that you do monitoring control. Burn down charts are real popular. That adds into the Agile conversation. Burn down charts essentially tell you, we started with this much work, today we have this much work, the next day we've got this much work, until you get to 0 amounts of work and then you're finished, right? Burn down charts are frequently used in conjunction with information radiators. When you went to your compulsory education, that was the board in your teacher's class that showed, these are the things that this person produced. It's fairly similar, although that's a very simplistic example, admittedly. But the point is that information radiators tell everybody, these are the things that just happened on the project. On my project, for example, you'll see videos that get produced by the contractor that say, we lifted a generator onto the roof of this building that's going to provide power in the event of an outage after we replaced the roof and after we laid down steel supports to hold the generator. So that's an information radiator type artifact that ends up on their web page, on their social media page. So in that case, the social media platform is the information radiator, but you can also have those in-house. You can have those if you use different platforms for communications management in-house. Somebody comes to your specific page, you can say, I completed this thing today and have a screenshot of it. Those are that's a very simplistic overview of information radiators. Dashboards, yes. You definitely want to have dashboards on your project. Project managers love dashboards. It's one of our favorite things. We build them a lot from different methodologies. There's different software packages to do it. Microsoft Project does it for you. I just lost the word for this. Smart Sheets also does it. So people use a lot of things that are not Tableau, and dashboards look different ways. I personally feel it would be great if we had unified methodology for building dashboards, but that's my own caveat. If everybody just used Tableau dashboards for all of their project reporting, that'd be great. Status meetings. Make sure you come to the status meeting prepared. That cannot be overstated. The number of times that you have meetings to plan a meeting so that you can have another meeting is not, that's not fun. But make sure that you have the status meeting so that you can monitor what's happening, so that you can understand what's going on in each of your teams. Now, status meetings can be different. They can be monthly, they can be weekly, or if you're in an agile environment, you may have daily stand-ups. I did this yesterday, I'm going to do this today. Those are different ways you can have status meetings. Final completion, the reason I put it in monitor and control is because you're tracking towards final completion of the project. Remember, I said that, at the beginning, projects end, right? So you want to be making sure that you're figuring out when is the project going to end. And because you don't want it to turn into a program, because if you're a project delivery organization, you actually survive from completing projects. So you want to be able to say, I successfully completed this project. Here is evidence of it, and put evidence of completion on your company's information radiator, right? Final completion is a critical item to track. So those are, and that's all the monitoring and controlling pieces I'm going to say right now, because I don't want to burn out all my time. Closeout. Closeout is the one area that a lot of organizations do not do correctly. And it can be done correctly. These are some of the things that you should do in order to do them correctly. One of those is document. Make sure that you document that you've gotten to the end point. That final completion thing we were talking about earlier, make sure that you've gotten to the spot that everybody agreed was, this is what we said was going to be final completion. And then have somebody sign off with the way you had them sign off on your project charter at the beginning. Have them sign off on the fact that you completed the task that they asked you to complete. When you get to what you think is the end, somebody's always going to come and say, you know what, it'd be great if we could have this little top chart over here, or we could make these little this little graph over here, or we could have an additional filter that does this, or we can have, someone is always going to ask you for another little detail. The thing is, there's got to be an agreement on, we are finished, because otherwise that, can you add another little detail, is going to continue in a cyclical pattern that never ends. And then it becomes a program, it's not a project. Once you're finished, hand it off to the person who's supposed to take it. Now, does that mean that you don't offer them some support, that you're going to not take their call, that you're not going to tell them, look, if they call you and say this is broken, that you won't fix it? Probably not. The point is, you're supposed to hand it off to them and say, this is no longer mine. It's now yours. You bought it, and you signed off, it's finished, here you go. Lessons learned. Now, everybody, we just went through the whole, these are the best tips for the hour presentation. That comes from a lessons learned file, because I went through this particular project and I said, you know what? I learned this thing, I'm gonna put it in a log, and then I'm gonna present it the next time this situation comes up. I know, remember we said inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs. I have this tool or a technique that I can use on the next project that will make it easier, or that'll increase the benefits realization, or that it will make it more impressive, or that something or other. Make sure you build a lessons learned file, and then read the lessons learned file the next time you do a project, because it always improves efficiency, and it always improves benefits realization for every stakeholder, whether that's, the 6 people that are in your department or the entire state of New York. I put postmortem on here. I know every single person on the planet hates postmortems. That's not the reason I put it on here. I put it on here because it's simply a placeholder. If you don't want to use the postmortem methodology to do a complete review of your project and have that be the final report, it's totally fine. There are about 100 different methods for doing a complete project review and logging all of the good, bad, and uglies that happen. But that is also something that you should really do. So 1, you can decide whether you should do another project like this again. Or 2, if it was successful, what are the things that made it successful, and how can we make sure we do that again? because you really want to do successful projects because it brings you more project work and that improves your bottom line. And you know, those are things that you'd like to have in life. I want to talk about risk for a moment. Now, risk is something that is usually, I put this little picture of the game of Risk up here as sort of a pay on to Andy Cotgrave, because he's always talking about board games. But not all risks are negative. What if it works? What if we do the project, it's a fantastic success and the people like us and they call us back to do something else? That's a risk that you want to take, right? That's the whole reason to do projects. Like, hey, you know, that looks like something I could do. What if it works? There are generally 4 ways to deal with this. Avoid it, accept, enhance. The reason I told you that there's variance is because accept is one way to say it. Enhance is another way to say it. You've heard this phrase get batted around. It says, you know, never skip an opportunity to I just lost the word. Never miss an opportunity to capitalize on a good disaster, right? Now, capitalizing on disasters is frequently very looked down upon very much, but the point that I'm trying to drive at is you have a negative situation, turn it into a positive. You've got something that looks like a major problem area. That is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for innovation. It's an opportunity to come up with a possible new business model. It's an opportunity to create an efficiency. There's opportunity in every negative situation and that's part of the risk. But those are things that you have to investigate. You should go about them in a very clearly thought out manner. You can mitigate the risk. If there's going to be flooding, you can put up flood walls. If there's going to be heat and dry spells, you can create irrigation. Those are just examples of, and they're very top level examples of mitigation techniques. But I think the point gets across. Transfer is always buy insurance, and insurance at different levels transfers different levels of risk. So that has and that's a decision that you have to make as your project organization. But at the end of the day, make sure that you create a risk register. When we looked at this project, we decided this risk is going to happen, that risk is going to happen. This is an opportunity that's going to happen at this point, and we should take it. And that's the point of the 2 charts that I've got on the right side of the slide, which is the risk opportunity matrix is at the top, and at the bottom is what's called a tornado chart, which means this is a tornado. The one that you're looking at on this slide is one you would never see because you've got equivalent probabilities for risks on both sides of the line. That's just not reality. What would normally happen is you would have different lengths of risk on either side of the line, and they would be more green, more of the risks would be green or more of the risks would be red. And depending on whether you had more negatives than positives or more positives than negatives, you would make the decision on whether this project was a go or no go. And depending on all of that risk evaluation, whether you can mitigate it, transfer it, whether it's going to create an opportunity, so on, that's where you would create your risk management plan. That's a critical item to have before you get going, because risks happen on day one. And remember, not all risks are negative. That risk that happens on day one could be an opportunity. So just make sure that you've got a plan to deal with it. What does done look like? That's partly in your requirements list, partly your quality metrics, partly, a number of other things, whether or not it was executed properly, whether or not, you've got tools and techniques to get it done. This is something that I built as a result of one of the presentations I went to at the Tableau conference. This is done, right? In my perspective. But I could always go back and do a little bit more tinkering. I could create, maybe I could create some color gradations in the work experience portion, or maybe I could tighten up what the interests. You'll notice that it looks like a tornado diagram because, how much do I like each of those things? But the point of this graph is, or this dashboard rather, is I stopped at a certain point because I had to say, all right, this is as far as I can get with it right now, and I'm going to post it. So this is on my Tableau public page, and you're free to go take a look at it. I'll give you my my Tableau public page at the end of the presentation. But that's the reason I put requirements and quality on this slide, because requirements and quality are going to definitely define what does done look like. If you're building a building and you get done building the building and the building looks like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, maybe that means you missed a few requirements, or maybe that's the way you were supposed to build it. It depends, right? From a very high level, it depends. If you're trying to recreate the Leaning Tower of Pisa and you've created it very successfully, awesome. But if that's not what you were trying to do and you were trying to have straight angles, then maybe you should go back and look at your methodology, that you might have skipped a couple steps. After this slide, I'm going to say some things that are very controversial. So buckle your seatbelts, all right? I mentioned Agile back at the beginning of the presentation, so I'm going to jump into that fight right now. A few words on Agile. Most organizations are not Agile. They will say that we do Agile style projects, in quotes. They'll say we have stand-ups. They'll say we do this. But if they've not done a complete Agile transformation of the full organization, and not everybody is focused on Agile, and not everybody understands what the definition of Agile means, and they haven't used the proper terminology, and they're not following the processes, and the people in the organization haven't completely remapped their thought process to be an Agile organization, the organization is not Agile. You can have Agile style, it's totally fine. You can have Agile style projects. We don't want to follow this waterfall method. Again, to move to point number 2, waterfall is not the enemy or the opposite of Agile, because even if you're doing an Agile project, the first thing a competent project manager does on an Agile project is build a project schedule. So the thing is, there's a lot to be said. There's a lot of investigation to do. There's a huge amount of other stuff that's not going to fit into my 45-minute presentation, and I'm getting to the end of. But please make sure that you research what this all means. I would point you towards the Project Management Institute website to start your investigations, because that's quite literally one of the main places to investigate. There's also the Scrum Alliance, and then there's another organization that's escaping me right now called that's an Agile based organization. But all of those have similar, although they're branded, definitions of what Agile means. Please go read those definitions, because it's very important, and it's also critical to understand what that all means. Even though data analytics is heavily digital, your approach is likely to be more classical, more waterfall than it is not. The reason I say that is because you can't build a hex bin chart by skipping steps. You've got to write the code first, and then you've got to put the right pill in the right box. Or and of course, the Flagler twins are going to tell me that you just have to that you have to learn different math concepts, and then you can forget the pills, right? But that's the steps that you're going to follow for whatever chart that you're going to build is it's going to probably be more waterfall than it's going to be Agile. Hey, Kanban charts are going to be, what's up, Caesar?
It's Caesar, just coming in with just a 2-minute warning.
Okay, I'm literally almost at the end.
Oh, awesome, thanks.
Yep. the Kanban charts are going to be your friends, because from an Agile perspective, you can say, okay, look, we're at this spot. Right now it's stopped, but now we've moved to a spot where we're getting close to done, so we can move this card over to yellow. Then, we got into a spot where we've gotten through most of the requirements. So now we're looking kind of green. And then, once you get everything signed off on and everything is complete, then, it's fully green. You can sign it. It's finished. Transfer to client. Hoshin Kanri is another. It's a very Japanese style tracking mechanism, which is primed for a bunch of beautiful visualizations, which I hope to see the data family produce. That would be really interesting to see. Leadership is another super critical skill that you've got to get trained in how to lead project teams. The reason I've got org chart versus org chart here is every organization has an organizational chart. The operation of the organization doesn't necessarily always happen according to the organizational chart that's on paper, right? If you're in any organization, there's a leader that you recognize in a team, and then there's a leader that has that title on the org chart. They're not always the same person. Figure out who each of those people are, because it's important to be able to speak to both. That should go into your personal communications plan. And personnel management also takes a real critical role. So you've got to make sure that you get trained in how to do that appropriately also. Command and control doesn't work. I mean, the military doesn't even use command and control anymore. So what are different personnel management and leadership styles? I want to put in another shameless plug for if you want to learn storytelling for leadership, which is another critical item, and I say it all the time. Make sure you look up Karen Hurt and her organization. I'll make sure to send that out somehow, but storytelling for leadership is a really, really critical skill. And again, that's another thing that maps across to our data analytics practice, because data storytelling is clearly one of those items that we're always talking about. And that is quite literally the end. Am I inside the time, Caesar?
You made it. a little over, right? But okay. No, it's fine. Hey, David, there is a question in the Q&A box. We're gonna keep going right now, but if you can take a look at the Q&A box right there. Okay. Trish had left you a question there, and we'll let you go ahead and answer that there for anybody who's interested. Yeah.
Managing by milestones, OKRs, and again, that's a tool and a technique, and it's something that I know this person, and she's listening on purpose just so she can send me this message. So
okay, it's always fun to have somebody just
hi Trish. But the point is that the managing by milestones or OKRs, it depends on the project. That's the answer. It depends, right? You're not going to use every single tool and technique. That's why this presentation is only 45 minutes, because I didn't do a deep dive into what all of those things mean. But the thing that she's referencing in here, very valid, very, very pertinent to the conversation. It's just not something that we had the time to go over. You can do it that way. It's just one way to do it. It doesn't mean one way is better than the other way, right? And which way you use is going to depend on the project that you're running.
Folks, please take quick note of all of David's contact info here. He does also have a Medium blog too. I'm dying to check out. I haven't checked out yet. So I'm excited about that. I didn't see any introduction from your cat.
No, she managed to stay mostly quiet during the during the presentation, but she'll pop her head in, I'm sure.
But yeah, we're gonna move along now. So thank you so much, everybody. Applause. And yeah, if you don't happen to have any questions, we're gonna take a short break.